people across different rhythms of life. So it's an opportunity to think about how we can leverage on technology to further improve the way we work, play, study, and live. Hence, we have all these different anchor teams that we have for this year's competition, which you can check it out on the Splash Awards 2020 website. So today, we are glad to have a panel of experts to converse on how technology is being used to impact society. We have Mr. Lee Chun-Seong, Managing Director, Essential Applied Intelligence. We have Ms. Christine Ang, Deputy Director, Emerging Capabilities Health Insights from ICES. And also Mr. Justin Xiao, Tech Analyst, Enablers Development, SG Innovate. Okay. The panel is moderated by Professor Helen Stevens, who is also my colleague at NTU Institute of Science and Technology for Humanity, NIST in short. And Helen is also the associate. Helen is also the associate director of NIST and also associate professor at School of Humanities, where his work focuses on understanding the social, political, and economic impacts of new and emerging technologies. So without further ado, once again, a big welcome. And without further ado, I would like to pass on to Helen to get the discussion going. Helen, please. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Adrian, and welcome to everyone. Welcome to all the audience members. Although I can't see any of you, this is a very strange experience to have an audience that is invisible to me. But nevertheless, and welcome to all the panel members as well. As Hedron says, tonight's discussion is going to be about how AI impacts society. This is a big topic. There's lots of areas of this, interesting parts of this topic to explore. And so I think we can get right into it. And I'm sure you want to hear from our panelists who come from a very diverse range of backgrounds from the private sector and from the public sector. And so perhaps just to get the discussion going, just to begin here, I can just ask the panelists one by one to just introduce themselves and to say a little bit about, especially about how they have interacted with artificial intelligence or how their work kind of intersects with artificial intelligence. So perhaps Jun-Seong, I could call on you first and just ask you to say a little bit about what your background is and how you're coming at this topic.
Thanks, Professor Helen. I think my name is Jun-Seong. I'm a Managing Director with Accenture Applied Intelligence. This is a team focusing on AI, data, automation. I work across different industries, so we bring AI solutions to our clients that can range from banks to telcos to consumer goods companies and so on and so forth. So I'm happy to share more of what I've done later in terms of how AI is being applied to businesses.
Great, thank you. And Justin, perhaps could ask you next.
Hello everyone, I'm Justin from SG Enable. So SG Enable is actually an agency that helps provide services for persons with disabilities. So as for me, myself, I'm part of the team that looks into assistive technology. And also we also co-manage TechAble over here. Yeah. So alongside with SPD, social service agencies, also serving persons with disabilities. So if you are interested to find more about assistive technology, you can scan the QR code over here. Or feel free to reach out to me. As for my work itself, since we look into technology, there's also a lot of different AI components out there, especially a lot in mainstream devices nowadays that can actually lower the barriers for persons with disabilities in all their everyday activities. Yeah, so I'll be happy to share more in the upcomings later.
Thanks, Justin. And Christine.
Hi everyone, my name is Christine. I'm a Deputy Director working in ICES, a technology agency for the public healthcare sector. And I help stakeholders explore and adopt AI to bring about impactful and actionable insights right in their daily work. I lead the planning and implementation of analytics and AI projects nationally to support MOH and the public healthcare institutions in their transformative programs to improve care and quality to their patients.
Great. Maybe it would be really helpful at this point to hear, since I think all of you kind of talked quite generally about a very specific example, right? Just so that the audience can think about, okay, what's an example of how AI has helped somebody in your job, or how you've deployed it in your job? Maybe Christine, since you're there, I can throw it straight back to you and say, can you think of a specific example of something that of a project you've worked on that's using AI?
Yeah, yes, Prof. So actually in IHIS, we develop with clinicians that believe or don't believe in AI, and we actually go through a lot of rigorous prospective validations together with them. We cannot say for others, but what we do is we have to make sure that what we do is as good and as accurate as a real doctor's assessment. Right, so our point of view is that we need to help doctors arrive at a better and faster decision with actionable insights. So one example that I've implemented is the Hospital at Home program. It's a nationwide initiative that actually supports patients with complex health and social needs, right, with high risk of admissions targeted for intervention so that they can stay well and safe in the community and at home. Right, we have actually taken a different approach. Right, so instead of using a 30-day readmission model, which is very popular in US and other countries, after discussion with our clinicians and with the social workers, right, our patients are actually not worried just about coming back 30 days, but more about thinking about how they can actually manage their health better, right, if they actually, if it gets worse, at home, right? So we have actually implemented this AI model to help identify these patients upstream and to focus and enable their care and outcomes instead. Yeah.
Okay, so the AI kind of helps you make a decision about like whether they're likely to need to be readmitted to the hospital.
That's right.
Okay, great, very interesting. Justin, perhaps we can go backwards along the panel here, so to speak.
For myself, particularly, we don't actually do the development of any AI engines or software or hardware in a particular sense, but our work entails more of finding out what are the available technologies out there. And then actually, when you look at technology itself, the application can actually be very wide. It may be designed for a particular purpose, but potentially, you look at it in a different way. It can actually be applied for a person with disabilities to manage, their home environment more effectively, being able to do their work, or even just, simple things such as eating itself. So when we talk about AI in particular, it's actually very available in smart devices. So a lot of times when person with disabilities actually can't look for solutions itself, it's really based on their needs. You see what's what they're looking to address, what's out there that can actually solve it. And actually, there's a lot of good work being done globally. They actually incorporated AI, to actually lower the barriers for persons with disabilities.
So is it fair to say in some sense your job is to sort of take technologies and try to match them to the needs of the particular individuals?
That's part of it. The other portion is actually there's quite a number of startups globally, and as well as tech companies, both globally and locally. So sometimes there may be a challenge there that is not being addressed by technology currently. And the particular tech company, for instance, actually has something that could address. So we actually try to match these groups of people together, try and come out something that is beneficial in that sense. So we sort of marry the folks together in that sense.
Great. Yeah, great, thanks. And Junsong, yeah, you mentioned different businesses that you've worked with. So perhaps an example would be, I think, really helpful for the audience.
Sure. More than happy. I have quite a few examples I can share. I think if you look at in the space of cybersecurity, for example, right? I think, which is a big topic or hot topic for every company. And the traditional way of using the cybersecurity defense system is rule-based. But then with the use of AI, we could actually use machine learning models to develop anomaly detection, to detect any cyber threats that typically couldn't be detected by using rule-based traditional cyber systems. So again, I think this is one example of how I think we have helped our clients in using AI in this case, right? And really, taking this cyber defense to the whole new level, right? I mean, in the world where I think you have all sort of cyber threats, I think this obviously becomes extremely useful. The other example is that we actually gone all the way to the dark web to look at, you know, some of the illegal drugs trends that's happening in the dark web. Again, I think this is using image analytics, trying to understand, you know, the images of different drug labels in the dark web. And if you have no reason to go to dark web, by the way, you know, please don't go there, right? Unless you have some other dealings that, you know, that you shouldn't be doing. So that's another example. I would just mention maybe very quickly, actually what we call the Internet of Chickens. I don't know whether you've heard this before, but this is a poultry farm in Thailand with the use of sensor data, video analytics to really understand the health of the chickens that they have in the farm. So there are many, many ways that where AI and machine learning and data science can be used, right, to help companies drive productivity, or in the case of cybersecurity, or, you know, the physical safety and security of citizens alike in the case of the dark web example.
Great, thanks. Perhaps I'll just stay with you for a moment here and ask you about kind of how you see this in terms of kind of future trends, right? So, I mean, I guess one thing that people talk about a lot, I mean, usually when people talk about AI, they're looking to the future a great deal, right? And they're thinking a lot about, well, how is this gonna change things? And I'm wondering in your work, Jun Song, how you see this. What kinds of trends do you see in terms of where this is really going to impact our lives, right? Is it going to be in the domains like cybersecurity, or do you think that there are other things that are emerging that are really going to be transformative on, you know, the way we all live?
No, I think that's a great question. I think if you look at the private sector, talk to companies, for example, I think many have actually embarked on piloting AI many years ago, right? But when you talk to the executives today, it's really beyond piloting AI solutions or capabilities. It's really about taking AI at scale. We did a survey recently with some of the Singapore executives, and more than 80% of them say that, you know, if they don't use AI at scale, they're going to be either out of business or they're not going to achieve the growth that they want. But at the same time, they all struggle to scale. But the long and short of it is that you know, we will see if you look at this as an adoption curve, you will see the verticalization of the adoption of AI, where companies or private sector, public sectors are all embarking on scaling AI, adopting this in a big way. And you will see that, you know, every industry and functions, almost every sector will see the adoption of AI. So I've been asked numerous times about, you know, the AI and how AI is impacting what industry and what sectors. There will be varying degree in terms of, you know, maturity and all that, but it's really pervasive across all industry and sectors. It will impact everybody. So the question is not so much about whether it will, but it's when. So in the example that I gave, you know, anything from chicken farm, right, to healthcare, what Christine was talking about, to every, you know, sort of day-to-day lives, right, you know, transportation and all that, you will see the pervasiveness in AI in no time. And because of the speed of adoption, and you will see this happening far more quicker than any of the technology evolution that happened over the last decade.
Great, thanks. And Christine, since you mentioned there, maybe I could jump over to you here and just ask you whether you you know, you see the same kind of thing, right? Do you see this as becoming something that's ubiquitous in healthcare? Do you see this? I mean, and if so, you know, is this something that's going to become just part of our everyday lives, or everyday kind of, if we go to the doctor, if we have to go to the hospital, right? Is this going to become something that's everywhere, or do you see this as limited to specific kinds of domains at the moment?
I think that over the past few years, AI has actually transformed quite a lot, right? And it's widely adopted in many industries, right? Either in terms of automation or in terms of optimizing the tasks that they're doing, right? And in fact, on the national level, right, Singapore has also announced the national AI strategy, right, with a vision to be the leader, right, to be able to develop and deploy scalable and impactful AI solutions by 2030. Right, and IHIS is actually one of the main, one of the 5 key national AI projects that's supporting the national AI strategy. So I think in terms of AI in its use, currently it's still very strong in terms of solving very narrow problems, right? And it could also be applied sometimes at a very narrow use case, which may not become a norm, or a way of life, right? But I think for us in IT's point of view is that we have to deliver AI models, right? Not just a model, right? But to be able to harness it by implementing it so that the users can actually adopt it, right? And be able to change the way of practice, right? And to do things better so that we can actually create more impactful outcomes for the population and the patients.
And in your case, many of the users are doctors, right? I guess, and nurses and other healthcare professionals, right? So that's your kind of target audience in some sense.
Yeah. That's right, yeah.
Yeah, great. Justin, just to bring you in on this question too, I mean, do you see this as something that's going to be absolutely pervasive in the kind of disability space, or what kinds of particular trends or particular, I guess, technologies that stand out to you, or you think will really stand out in the next, I don't know, let's say 5 years? Are there particular things you see?
Okay, I would like to agree with both of the panelists, my other panelists, in the sense that, you know, the way I look at it in terms of AI, there are actually two major fronts. So one is really about the process automation, you know, taking on the administrative works, you know, converting process, and this is rapidly pushed on by, you know, a lot of companies actually moving towards digital services, and especially at this time during the pandemic, you know, and when you have all these services move up to digital, actually you will find AI included in the bits and pieces here and there. So things like chatbots, you know, automated delivery, transportation, you have all your automated sorting and packing. All these itself potentially not only benefit us or organizations, but it can also benefit person with disabilities, you know, by giving them enhanced convenience, you know, faster, having faster access or alternative access to information and services, which they may not be able to do now by going out, you know, to physically and getting the required information. Yeah. So secondly, is also, you know, just like I mentioned about, you know, AI being very much being embedded in a lot of smart devices nowadays. So it's also a little bit of like the bits and pieces here and there. So things that we have, you know, voice recognition, some of the prediction functions, you talk about virtual reality, augmented reality kind of displays, Internet of Things, all those are rapidly being being embedded into our smart devices, and this benefits everybody because, you know, everyone can work, live, learn, and play together without much of the same barriers. So, but the thing to consider about that, you know, while AI development is moving in this direction, is AI actually being made accessible to different groups of people? Are you actually leaving anyone out? Are you ensuring that, you know, everybody is represented appropriately? You don't want to include the bias that can actually have an impact in this kind of developments that further impact on the end users themselves. In this case, persons with disabilities.
Great, thank you. And maybe that's a useful place to transition into kind of my next set of questions. I must admit at this point that I'm a fairly pessimistic person. I guess as part of my job is to be a fairly kind of pessimistic, I don't know, cynical, one might call it critical person, I guess. And so when I think about, I mean, when I spend my time thinking about kind of the impact of AI, I often think about all the things that can go wrong. I mean, that's really, that's really my job. So I guess that I'm going to ask you about that now. Perhaps we can just pick up right there, Justin. And, you know, I mean, in terms of social impact, I think you've all said, like, you know, we're at a hugely important moment in terms of thinking about all the benefits that AI can bring across a huge range of sectors and across a huge range of things. And perhaps that, you know, also things that have already happened, right? Things that we now don't even think about, right? Voice recognition, these types of things that are embedded in our devices, right? These are already bringing all kinds of benefits to us. But I do think it's very important when we think about social impact to also think about all the kinds of problems that may occur as well. And I wondered maybe, Justin, you could just start out by saying a little bit more about what you see some of the potential problems are, and maybe you could start with this issue of, I guess, inclusivity, which you already mentioned, right? And
Yep. So on the same point, I mean, when you talk about AI, the strength itself, is really about, sensing or the pattern sensing, and deriving the best optimal outcome based on the likelihood. So in a sense, you're actually feeding a lot of data to the AI engine, to actually make it rapidly in terms of the rapid development. So you need to think about how AI is actually being continuously built upon, and actually adjust it accordingly as you move along. So just like I mentioned about bias, in terms of the checks itself, did you unknowingly perhaps maybe exclude certain groups of people that are perhaps not represented appropriately? And this could put these groups, at a disadvantage, perhaps maybe not even accessing that particular AI solution itself. So I will just give two simple examples based on this. So one is, how do we go about, or generally, how do people go about applying jobs nowadays? Go online, they submit their resume. So to help the HR professionals, most of them actually perhaps may have made use of automated filtering systems, which actually filter resumes, based on their past successful hires. And this could actually be the disadvantage, for example, for persons with disabilities who may not have as good credentials or track record due to their disability. They may not have gotten that opportunity for work in the first place. So in that sense, although you do this filtering, you're cutting them out for the organization itself. Are you also cutting off potential candidates who actually perhaps may be able to do better or on the same level as those that actually filter out from your system? And another example is there's a lot of talk about autonomous vehicles nowadays. So we always the main concern brought up is always about the collision avoidance system. So if you think in that sense, if you always train the system or the AI engine to actually recognize humans, for example, like myself who is able-bodied, being able to walk around, no disability, then the system will only recognize me. The system will not recognize a wheelchair user, will not recognize a senior with a walking stick, someone, vision impaired user with a white cane, or even just young kids. So then there's actually a risk over there. So that's why I mentioned, are you excluding unknowingly, certain groups of data or people outside of this that can perhaps limit, your development in the AI solution itself. Of course, all that being considered, if your AI solution or your engine itself, you have to consider whether after finished development, is this accessible to persons with disabilities? Do they have the means to access it? Is this something that they can see, they can view, they can hear, or they can pull information from it? So you do not want to actually limit the reach of their access to these solutions itself, because you're actually pulling away or enlarging the digital divide. And this is not something a lot of countries will actually take into consideration. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Maybe I'll just weave in just a question here that's come up from the audience, and please, I should say at this point, I'll try to weave in questions that are coming up in the Q&A from this point, where I think it's useful and appropriate. But the question here is about whether, there's some curiosity, I think, about the ability of AI to take people's jobs, and I'm sure this is something that's going to come up further in our discussion as well. But do you think, the question is basically asking, do you think this may have a differential impact on people with disabilities? This is something I hadn't thought of, but just the idea, I guess, here, and maybe this is an incorrect assumption, but that actually people with disabilities may be doing more simpler and more basic jobs, and that those may be the first to be automated by AI. Just wondering whether you have any thoughts about that.
Yep. In fact, that's one of the more common points that are actually being brought up when we talk about not just AI, but technology in general. With the development of technology being so rapid itself, are we, perhaps unknowingly, taking away their jobs from them? Yeah. So when we talk about technology itself, or AI in this sense, it's really about it's really a double-edged sword. So definitely you can help persons with disabilities for them to use actually AI to actually enhance their lives to be more independent in different sense, such as employment. At the same time, you have to also consider that you are perhaps maybe eliminating the job from them. So then from there then comes is what are you using the AI for? What is the intent? And then from there, if you're talking about employment itself, I would say it's very much the same as per anyone else, not just for person with disabilities. Is there are you able to actually create more higher value jobs rather than the simple automated processes which can actually be resolved by AI? So can you actually come out something from there with the AI solution? Yeah.
Right. So it's about creating new opportunities at the same time as maybe some older opportunities are disappearing. Thanks. Maybe I'll ask either Jinsong or Christine to jump in at this point on this question, and maybe say something about what they see as the potential risks here, or the potential downsides of the impact of AI on society. Jinsong, I see your microphone.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. I think the reality is that it's important that we understand the reality. The reality is that some of the jobs will go away, right? But then, like what Justin was saying, new jobs will be created. Now, things that can be automated, they can be automated by AI and should be automated so that we can drive productivity. But if you look at, the new roles and jobs being created, I think these are the jobs that require individuals like ourselves, all of us, to upskill in order for us to be relevant in tomorrow's world. So I think we look at, for example, as we have more and more AI systems being developed, there will be more and more the need for what we call the AI explainer, people who can explain the AI and use AI in the context of business. There will be a need for more creative thinking. There will be a need for more business context. And this is the kind of jobs that I think, we need many people who can have that creativity and create the business context of how to use AI systems to help drive productivity, reduce costs on upsell, cross-sell, and so on and so forth. So in short, jobs will be taken away for sure. And these are the jobs that I think obviously can be automated easily by AI. And there will be some jobs that obviously that, as AI becomes smarter and smarter, will slowly encroach into the human intelligence space, but it's still artificial intelligence. So at this point, I think the important thing is that how do we all upskill ourselves to stay relevant in the context of where AI become pervasive, and there will be new roles that we want to fill, and we want to fill those roles.
Great, thank you, Christine. Yeah, perhaps you can also weigh in on this question as well.
So I think that actually we are using AI more of assisting and augmenting humans, right, in areas which it is good at, right? And the AI powerful use is when we can actually use to enhance, right, and extend our existing capabilities so that we can reach further goals, right? So from healthcare perspective, AI is meant to help elevate manpower concerns, right, that we are facing because of the increasing pressures of our aging population, and currently is used largely for administrative tasks from a Singapore public healthcare context. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily about replacing people in this case, right? We're probably a long way from replacing medical doctors, right? But or nurses for that matter, right? And I think, thinking here also along the lines of what other jobs are going to be created, I think is very important. I do recommend to everybody Lee Kai-Fu's fairly recent book, AI Superpowers, and in that book he talks a lot about what types of jobs we'll need more of in the AI future. And in addition to the kinds of jobs of explainer that Jinsong was just mentioning, also caring jobs, right? Jobs that involve caring for other people, where you actually need to show empathy and trust, and these very human qualities are probably not likely to be replaced anytime soon. maybe I'm just going to push a little bit more on this same theme, and we've talked a lot about jobs, but I also wonder about other potential issues that may arise, and one of them that immediately I think comes to people's minds is privacy, you know, maybe this is probably makes sense for me to start here with Christine, because I know that this has been an issue in the healthcare sector, both in Singapore and elsewhere. And thinking about, you know, a lot of AI relies on having huge amounts of data for training. You know, it's very much goes along with huge data sets, and that when this is things like medical data, right, when it's my health records, you know, this potentially becomes a problem. So I was wondering whether this is something that you see as a real challenge, or how perhaps you're addressing it in the kinds of work that you do as well.
Yeah, I think data privacy is definitely the utmost importance, and especially in healthcare, right? We definitely have to think of ways, or many ways, right, to see how to protect the patient confidentiality, right? I think in Singapore we have very good framework with regards to protecting data, right? We have, I mean, from a healthcare perspective, we have a data governance framework that is well established, right? Yeah, that's that.
Yeah, right. So I mean, right. There's a lot of, I think, protections in place. But I also wonder what, I guess, what challenges AI as it develops may pose to these kinds of existing kinds of frameworks. Justin or Jinsong, do you have anything that you might want to add about this question of privacy, or indeed other challenges that you see emerging here?
Maybe I'll just share some thoughts there in terms of privacy. I think there are different parties involved here. I mean, firstly, I think as an individual, you have to be extremely mindful of what you are sharing and what you want to share, right? So that's, I think, you know, sometimes we just mindlessly just share our data without understanding the consequence, right? So that's at the individual level. At the government level, obviously, there's policy to be made, like in the case of Personal Data Protection Act, to facilitate, right, the rightful use of data, your data, which is really important. Then from a company standpoint, for example, it's about practicing and adhering to the Personal Data Protection Act, and at the same time respecting customer privacy, allowing them to have the option to opt out. And if you look at the GDPR in Europe, for example, that has obviously impact globally, and this is the Global Data Protection Regulation. And having those you know, framework in place is really about protecting, you know, data privacy. And all these are, you know, you need all parties to work together. You need the companies to be adopting these approaches to protect your data, make sure they are secure. You need the government to intervene, to have the regulation to protect the consumers. You need consumers to have awareness, right? You know, what to share, what not to share. And I think that's, you know, we all work together. Then obviously, then, you know, we can preserve the data integrity and making sure that, you know, data privacy is preserved.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this overlaps a little bit with my next question as well, which was going to be about who's responsible, right? And how do you solve these problems, which I think are, you know, I mean, a big questions, right? And as you say, I think that it is about individuals and the private sector and governments kind of working together on these, and we're not going to be able to solve it without all three of those sort of parties or institutions working together. But maybe I'll also just on this point ask Justin, do you have anything that you want to add? I mean, either on this issue of privacy, or whether there are other particular challenges or potential problems that you see emerging here with artificial intelligence.
As my two other panelists said, private issues I think are pretty much a given. But if you think about how to best use it, you know, it could possibly be a reasonable trade-off. You know, we could enhance some of the independence for persons with disabilities, you know, at the cost of some privacy. Of course, there are various ways you can possibly mitigate this, you know, either by having temporary data collection or through anonymous kind of collection of data itself. Other problems I mentioned just now was really about, you know, the accessibility and access to technology itself. So this you need to consider in terms of the implementation. Also, I just want to follow up a question from the Q&A regarding about just now my point on you know, creating higher jobs, value jobs for persons with particularly the question is intellectual disabilities. So instead of looking at it that way, perhaps maybe let's flip it around and say that, you know, how can we actually use AI, you know, to better understand perhaps maybe the capabilities of persons with disabilities, and then use AI to actually simplify the work for them, so that the job is actually easier. Because for some of these individuals itself, even for the current scope, it may actually be a little bit too complex. So how can we use AI or technology in general to actually simplify and make it a more satisfying employment experience for them?
Great.
And Helen, I think if I can comment on, you know, your questions also, I think earlier, I think data privacy is one dimension. As you rightly pointed out, you know, AI system built on data, and therefore data privacy is an important one. I think there are two more potential, issues with AI system that we need to pay attention to. One is how you ensure that, you know, we don't bake in to AI decisioning systems the societal biases and human biases. Like I think Justin, you mentioned very briefly earlier on about biases. And therefore, as a data scientist or someone building AI systems, I think it's extremely important that there's a mechanism in place to allow you to check, you know, or audit, you know, your AI systems to ensure, to the extent possible, they are bias-free, right? Now, I think we talk about this, I think, you know, briefly about oversampling or undersampling of data. I think, Justin, you mentioned a few times about those data, which is exactly the point. I think it's therefore the responsibility of the developer or companies who are responsible for building those systems to have those check and balances in place, right? And then the other thing, of course, is that, you know, this is about making sure there's a bias-free system being built. There are also AI systems being built deliberately to cheat, right? I mean, you have the deep fake, right? You have the synthetic, you know, voice and so on and so forth. So again, I think these are the technology advancement that we have to pay attention to, whether authorities or private sector companies and all that need to be extremely mindful. And like in the case of a synthetic voice can be really, really harmful when it comes to authentication and stuff like that. And there needs to be therefore counter technology using AI, right? You use the machine to fight the machine basically, right? To identify ability, you know, opportunities, you know, to do the check and balance. So I think these are the two additional points over above the data privacy that we mentioned. Now, maybe one last point is that now when you talk about who is responsible, that's exactly the issue that we have today, right? There's no clear accountability. Now, is that the guy, you know, who is building the system who is responsible? So if you are a large bank, for example, you have one guy who developed the credit scoring system and he undersampled the data and therefore the credit decision is wrong. Is the guy who developed the software responsible? Is it the bank CEO? Is that the marketing guy? Is that the compliance or risk guy? So this is a hot topic, to be honest, in terms of establishing accountability. And it has to be established. That's the main thing. And so this is an evolving topic that is still, you know, being discussed and debated.
Yeah, so if I may add on to Justin's point, I think it's important that we recognize the limitation of the data, right, the model, as well as the technical solutions that we implement, and be able to probably put in some human methods of limiting bias, right, such as having a human in the loop, right, for a final results kind of outcome. Right, and I think further than that is we also need to have a very clear set of measure outcomes, and we need to continually do a regular review of the model performance and to track their drifts right after operationalization.
Yeah, great. Justin, anything you wanted to add to this? I mean, there's a host of issues here, right, that I think are clustered around this issue of bias, which is linked to the earlier issue, right, of discrimination, right, which is linked to these ideas of responsibility and the ability to who is accountable, right? If you haven't, I'd be glad to hear any thoughts you have about
Rather than putting it from, who is going to be accountable for all this, when we talk about, trying to mitigate all these issues coming out from AI itself, I think it has to start from ground up. Everyone has to be involved, not just the developers. You have to include the designers, the end users, including persons with disabilities, the project teams, marketing, etc. If you think about accessibility in general, you have to really involve all these people together, from ground up, so that you don't actually see it from only the perception of the developer of the AI engine itself. You need to take time, you need to put in resources to actually understand and consider the different challenges that everybody face, and then how your AI engine or how your technology, can be developed in a way that, can benefit everyone in general. Of course, some folks might say that this is very resource intensive in the beginning, but what you are doing, you are future-proofing your own AI engine or your system itself, such that you do not need to make hefty changes later on in order to accommodate to more needs, that you could have addressed from the development process, but perhaps you are unaware, or you choose not to start first, and then you pay the price and in the later on. Yeah, so it's always better, starting from ground up, get the different folks involved.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. I think that, right, the more diversity we can have in the kind of design and production process, the more we are likely to see outcomes that are acceptable to a larger group of people and to society as a whole. I think there's perhaps, I think maybe Junseng referred to it a little bit, but there's another issue that's lurking here a little bit, and that's the issue of transparency. And this is really an issue of how much can we understand about AI, right? And is it necessary to understand how AI works? And this is sometimes people describe this in terms of explainability, right? Can we explain AI to one another or to our customer or to a patient in a hospital, right? And I was just wondering whether all of you have any thoughts on this issue of whether we need transparent and explainable AI, right? Whether we need AI that we can actually, in order to, for example, have accountability, right? Somebody be responsible. Perhaps there also needs to be transparency. So I was wondering, maybe this is another sort of topic we could explore a little bit.
And Helen, this is an extremely important topic, I think, in the context of the business world, or maybe in both a public and private sector. You think about using the same example that I use about credit scoring, for example. The approach of putting this into a black box, whatever goes in comes out, sorry, I think you are, unfortunately, credit score 0001, without the ability to explain, just doesn't work. Now, the challenge is twofold. One is that now, how do you explain, in business language to firstly the business manager or whoever that, within the organization, and then explain to the customer the decision process. Now, that is, I think itself, there's a barrier there already, because the data science literate, or the more IT literate, and people who are not so literate, that's already a hurdle that we need to cross. But that's not it's still possible to be resolved. I think, that's something that I think can be done. Now, what is getting extremely tricky is that when you use more advanced deep learning technique, like convolution neural network, when you start looking at, how an image is being analyzed layer by layer, and it's extremely difficult to explain the process to any layman, right, to any customers, that how you arrive at that decision. Think about how you use a label images data and then processing it and then arriving at a conclusion that you belong to this group. And those are the additional challenges brought about by the use of more advanced techniques. But I think at the bare minimum, I think there must be an attempt by companies to arrive at a way to explain, and this is necessary. And as more and more systems are being built, right, with decision built into the AI system, powered by data, and this transparency and explainability is absolutely critical.
Thanks. Justin or Christine, do you have any thoughts on this? I guess this is particularly important in healthcare, right? If I go to the doctor and the doctor gives me, some medicine, I kind of want to know the reason, right? I don't want to just say, take this, but,
Yeah, so I think interpretability is actually very important, and explainable AI still remains very most challenging areas in terms of machine learning today, right? Nonetheless, we still need to build the confidence, all right, amongst the clinicians, and to be able to explain how we actually arrive at certain conclusion, right? And after all, it's all about patient safety that we are all concerned about, right? So in healthcare, we can mitigate some of this by doing cross checks against established manual norms, right, as well as golden standards, right, for consistency. Right? And we also conduct prospective validations to validate our models with a local population data set before we do deployment at scale. Yeah, so these are some of the ways that we can do that.
Maybe you could explain that a little bit more? So these are kind of technical means to basically ensure that you're producing reliable results. Is that? So,
yes, sir. Yeah.
Great. Justin, did you have any thoughts on this issue?
Okay, for our side, I think when we look at persons with disabilities, we look at our stakeholders itself. Just now I talked about starting from ground up, so you actually get them involved from the start already. So it's very much on the developers end. We feel to perhaps maybe highlight certain things to them in terms of transparency. It's not saying not important, but I think when we look at our stakeholders, the outcome is actually the more important point rather than transparency itself, because we want to make sure that the technology that you come up with, the application itself it achieve what it intends to do, rather than focusing on the technicalities of the technology itself. Yeah.
Thanks. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to try to take a few questions from the Q&A panel here. One of them is about, and it's sort of related, I think, to issues that we've been talking about here, and it's about using human, I guess, facial recognition together with police surveillance in the United States. But that's, this is also an issue not just in the US. I think many countries are now adopting facial recognition technology and deploying it in various ways. So I was wondering if any of you have any thoughts on, I guess, this kind of use of AI by not only by governments, I suppose, but also corporations are beginning to do this as well. And I guess I'm interested here in your thoughts on what could again go wrong in this kind of scenario. Yeah, please.
I think let me try that. I think the key word here is consent. At the end of the day, right? I think whether it is between the government and the citizens, or whether between individuals and the customers and the companies, it all boils down to consent. Once you have the consent, then obviously then you have the right to use the data that I have consented you to, right? So obviously, I think in the context of a country where a government prescribes the policy, and there needs to be trust from the citizens to empower the government to use the data, and knowing that they will use the data discreetly and they will use the data respectfully. So there's always a trade-off between, I think, security and liberty, right? So I think that's where you give up sort of your biometric information for policing to be done more effectively, I mean, in exchange for security. So by country, obviously, there will be different norms and cultural considerations. I think these are the kind of tensions and that needs to be resolved, and where we get to the middle ground. Now, in the context of healthcare, I know for the fact that, for example, I think you need to give consent, for example, for data to be shared across hospitals and different clusters and all that. So there's all this boils down to consent at the end of the day.
Yep, and I would like to very much echo on that in terms for person with disabilities and technologies itself. So I just give an example such as something that we have called the All Cam. So it's basically an attachment device powered by AI they attach to the side of the specs that can help persons with this visual impairment, particularly identify text, being able to read out text, recognize faces as well. So the part about being able to recognize faces is really about getting the users getting consent from the other party to actually record and capture the image of the face, so that for future references or future recognition, it's automated rather than telling you generic info such as young male standing in front of you. It can be customized, such as, this person is John, this person is Mary, for example. So it's really boils down back to the consent. Yeah.
Christine, anything to?
I think the use should be controlled to a specific use case, and it has to be made known to the public, right? After all, you are signing up you need to know what you're signing up for in this case. Yeah. So I mean, I echo both of them in the previous points as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think this is probably, we could have a whole other discussion on this topic of privacy and surveillance and, and consent as well around AI. And it's a very tricky one. And I don't think we're going to solve it anytime soon. And as Jun Song says, I think that, different countries are going to find different balances that they find appropriate for kind of coming to terms with this issue. Perhaps, I think maybe this might even be a kind of last question here, and this is a question I'm kind of taking from Charlotte in the Q&A, but maybe a decent place to end here or to start to wrap up. So Charlotte is asking about, how to get into this field, and what kind of jobs and the potential. But maybe I'll broaden that a little bit and ask all of the panelists a little bit about kind of what should students, I mean, most of our audience today are students, and what should they be thinking about? What should they be learning about? What should they be investing in terms of their time in order to kind of prepare in some sense for an AI future, right? And especially an AI future, that we'd all, a beneficial one, right? A one that we hope is better than the world we live in now. So yeah, just like your thoughts on, what kinds of things should people be doing and thinking about, especially young people, to kind of prepare for where AI is going. Perhaps Christine, since you're in front of my screen here, I could ask you right away.
I think you have to be very passionate, right, to be able to learn anything, right? Be it is AI or any other topics that they are looking for, right? And I think you can join certain competitions like the Kaggle competitions, etc., to hone your skills, right? To continue to improve, and also maybe contribute back to the social good, right, of the society by creating some of these AI solutions and projects, and be able to maybe get it to Justin, and he can actually help roll out some of this. Yeah.
Thanks.
In fact, where I'd like to continue, really from Christine, really it's about the empathy itself, how do you want to develop your technology, or how do you want to get into this field? And when you design something, are you designing to be inclusive? Yeah, and I think this is a very, very major thing that is happening globally right now, the thought about inclusivity. And then of course, if you put in all your other elements in place, think about universal design, etc., then you are essentially creating tech for good itself. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, and Jichong.
My thought is that sort of a slightly different angle is that I think for Singapore to be a smart nation, we need Singaporeans and citizens alike to be AI literate, right? That there will be, given the pervasiveness of AI, I think in one way or another, AI will touch our lives, whether we are the user or whether we are a developer or we are something in between. If you look at, if the question is that, is it really important whether there's a need for more and more talent in this space? The question is yes, and yes, right? Now, the question is that, of course, you can play different roles in the context of AI, right? AI requires a lot of data, right? And therefore, you can build your skills towards contributing to the AI movement in a way by becoming a good data engineer, putting together data together, for example. You can also become a good data scientist, right? By building models that embed into a particular system, image analytics and all that. So that's one track. Now, you can also become a good functional person, right? In the context of, say, for example, you use AI in the context of healthcare, right? In the industry, you use AI in the context of supply chain, for example, right? So these are the different functional use cases and all that. So there are many different roles and paths relating to AI. And so I think as you look at how you grow your skills, right? Talking to the students out there, and these are what the companies are, going out there hiring now, right? Trying to really look for talent, across different spectrums, right? Whether you are a data person, you are AI engineers, whether you're a data scientist, whether you're someone who can really translate that, into functions and industry, this is really a space that in demand. I mean, Singapore cannot achieve the goal to be a smart nation without people in this space.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we definitely need this kind of talent, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that you need a degree in computer science or computer engineering, right? There are lots of ways in which to approach this topic. And so, I encourage many of you to kind of take up that challenge. I think we're pretty much on the cusp of 7:30 here, so I'm going to kind of wrap it up. Thank you to all three of you on the panel. This has been, I think, a very wide-ranging discussion, but hopefully a very useful one to the audience. So thank you very much. And perhaps at this point, I'll hand it back to Hedron, I think, to have the last word. Hedron, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. So thank you for the engaging discussion. Thank you for the insights. We look forward to to hearing more from you, and also do join us for the next panel as well, happening on the 29th, I believe, 29th of July, 6:30, with SenseTime, Huawei, and Pen AI, where we talk more a little bit on how various components of AI are being used with deep tech, 5G, IoT for smart nation. Okay, so once again, very much thank you so much for your time, and have a good evening. Oh, sorry, before that, I think there's a QR code at the bottom, right? So feel free to submit your feedback to us. All right. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, bro. Yeah.
Thanks
Thanks
everyone.
all.
Thank you.
I'm going to try to answer some of these. There's a couple more questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'm typing one.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a happy Friday and a happy weekend.
You too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.